One of the greatest gifts of the Judeo-Christian tradition, so the Jewish tradition that comes into Christianity, but one of the greatest gifts that tradition has offered is the sense that God desires to be in relationship with us, and that we, in turn, desire to be in relationship with God. So God loved us, and so that brings us into this relationship where we are now called, invited, gifted with the ability to then love God in return. So it goes something like, because God first loved us, we now can love God, and when that gets extended, it extends to love of God being experienced and communicated through love of neighbor. The Christian community took this notion of, well, first of all, one God, but also this one God who wanted to be in relationship with us, and formed that into this sense that God is always with us. So regardless of where we find ourselves in life, what the particular circumstances of the day are, we live in confidence and in faith that God is always with us. The United Church of Canada expressed that in our 1968 creed by the statement, "We are not alone." We are not alone. Regardless of where we are not alone. Thanks be to God. That reality, that fact in our lives is always, regardless of consequence, reason for rejoicing. And we hear that in the passages that we have today. So Zephaniah is one of the minor prophets. And I think I might have said this before. We call them minor prophets not because their message isn't really important, but because their books are so short. So we've got Isaiah and Jeremiah, the big guys, and then we have the minor prophets who have really short books, but often containing some incredible depth of meaning. You all know that Micah is one of my favorite minor prophets. In this passage today, we are joining the people of Israel during, it's believed, during the siege of Jerusalem. And we might think, having read what we've read this morning, that the end of the story is that Jerusalem goes on. But Jerusalem actually is defeated during this time. And the people of Israel are sent into exile. But in the midst of that siege, in the midst of being besieged by the enemy, we have the prophet who's saying, "Sing, daughter Zion, shout, Israel, be glad and rejoice with all your heart." Why? Because we know that God, regardless of the circumstance, God is with us. Regardless of what tomorrow is going to bring, we know that God will be with us. We know that if it's the worst of days that we experience tomorrow, there are better days ahead. And we know that if we experience a great day tomorrow, then there's probably some challenges ahead. But in all things, because of this relationship that we know that we have with God. And so remember that God is like, well, we know, the creator of all things, like all-powerful, everlasting. That God wants to be in a personal relationship with each one of us, and for that, we ought to rejoice. So, I think I may have told you this before, but I'll tell you again, that when I work with couples, and they're getting married, and it actually happened with Rachel this summer, and I give my little 5 minutes of brilliance, I call it. Okay, So my 5 minutes of brilliance, I tell couples that there are 3 rules to a good marriage, and if you follow the 3 rules, you are practically guaranteed success. And the 3 rules are communication, communication, and communication. That's the 3 rules. And the reason I say that is because it seems like a really easy task. That if you're marrying this person and this is the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, that it seems like communication, to talk to each other, might be something that would happen naturally. But we all know that there are moments in our lives together when that communication is incredibly difficult. When we are facing extreme hardship, and we look at our partner, our spouse, our husband, our wife, and we think, I really want to talk to them about this, but they have so much else on their plate, right? They're so busy, like they're busy at work, they're busy with the kids, they're busy with the dog, they're busy with, there's always things that get in the way. And so we choose not to. And I tell couples, like that is the absolute worst decision you can make. Because on that day, when you vow to each other to be married, you are saying to each other that I want me to be the first person you come to, regardless of what the circumstance is. Come to me and tell me the great news, tell me the mediocre news, and most importantly, tell me the sad news, the difficult news, the anxiety-ridden news. Because that's who I want to be in your life. And so I tell couples to practice. So during the good times, make a point of going home and talking about the good stuff that happened today. Talk about the great lunch you had. Talk about the promotion that you're looking at. Talk about the car you just saw and you're thinking maybe we can afford that. Talk about the fact that there's a new house on the market. But talk about it fully, because by talking about the great stuff, it prepares you, it opens that door, it sets the table for when you need to talk about the really hard stuff. The readings today tell us something very similar about our relationship with God. The Apostle Paul writes, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your gentleness be made known, because God is near. Don't worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, in thanksgiving, make your request be made known to God." In the good times, when things are going really well, rejoice in the Lord. Rejoice and let God know that God is there. Let your hearts hear God tell you that God is rejoicing with you, that God is present in those great, absolute, joy-filled moments. Let your hearts know that, let your head know that, and let communicate it in such a way that God knows it and that the people around you know it. That today, my joy is twice as much as it could be because I am sharing it with God. Because then, as we walk through life and we hit those more difficult moments when really, and I don't know if everybody's been here. If you haven't been here, then thanks be to God. But there are moments when God's presence is so hard to detect. It is so hard to know. Like you sit and you just feel that absolute, and here's the definition of desolation. The definition of desolation for Christians is when you cannot feel that presence of God. When you can't feel it. When you want it, and you can't feel it. The Apostle Paul says that in those moments, even in those deepest, darkest, most desperate moments, rejoice in God. Because even if you don't know it, in the midst of that darkness, God is sitting with you. God is present. As you weep those tears of absolute agony, God weeps with you. Just as real as when you had those great moments of joy and laughter and celebration, God was enjoying and laughing and celebrating with you. We are called on this day of joy to remember that even in those moments that seem joyless, we can rejoice that God is with us. We can rejoice that we know that we are children, sons and daughters and children of God. We can rejoice that we are never alone. Never alone. And the proof of that statement and the proof of the faith that we hold dear is found in about 2 weeks' time in the birth of a child that came and offered light to a world that was living in darkness. And for that, we can say, thanks be to God.